Welcome to the Lady Landlords podcast, where we empower women to gain financial independence through real estate investing. I'm your host, Becky Nova, founder of Lady Landlords. If you're ready to buy, manage, and grow your real estate portfolio, then let's get started.
Hopefully we are live over here in the Lady Landlords Facebook group. I also have us live over here on Instagram. I got my notes over here. We got a lot going on. So if you saw on Lady Landlords earlier today, I did mention that we're going to come on and we're going to talk a little bit about the new guidance for ESAs, emotional support animals, that HUD put out over the past couple days. All right. So if you are listening, you're in the right place if that's what you want to learn about here. So feel free to say hi in the comments. Let me know if you can hear me as I get going. I put a post in the Facebook group about this yesterday and got a ton of response about it. I did make a video or two just going over very briefly what we'll be talking about here with the ESAs. So feel free to go over to my Instagram at Becky Nova. For those people watching me over here, I do have that video up on my wall as a reel. Okay, I had it in my stories yesterday, but this has become a very big topic, so do want to make sure that everybody is able to kind of start to get that information here. Okay, so we're doing that live here. Feel free to put your questions down in the comments. I'm going to answer them. I tried to collect up a lot of the questions that I got over the past day, so we should be able to go through those as well. I almost need a third device because I want to make sure I get everybody's questions here. We will figure that out, and there is going to be a replay of this in the Lady Landlords Facebook group, so don't worry, I'll make sure that everybody's questions are answered, okay? But otherwise, let's kind of dive into this. First off, if we have not met, hi, my name is Becky Nova. I am the founder of Lady Landlords. Now, what we are talking about today, I do want to make this clear that I am not an attorney. Okay, this is my opinion, my perception of what I have read through the different documents and what has come out from HUD, and we're going to discuss what that is in a minute. But I just do want to remind everybody here that we should be working with our attorneys. We should make sure to be also following up and following the guidance of HUD and understanding our fair housing guidelines. They are laws that we do need as landlords. These are business practices that we do need to be aware of. So I want to make sure that everybody here is also doing their own due diligence. Locations are going to be different, okay? And we're going to talk about that here in a few minutes. We are going to talk about what has changed on a federal level, but there are certain states, cities, there are municipalities that have their own rules that also need to be followed. And that's something that is going to be incredibly important. I mostly invest in New York State. We do have different guidance here, so that will absolutely impact what has changed with HUD, and we're going to talk about that. But I encourage you to always do your own due diligence. So once again, I am not an attorney. I'm speaking about my own experience and my interpretation of the news that has recently come out on HUD's guidance on ESAs. So this is a topic that has absolutely popped up all over social media. There's a lot of confusion about it, and I'm going to address that in a moment too. And I understand the plight of us being Lady Landlords. We've talked about this so often in our Facebook group about really just not having great guidance about people that have properties that are no pets, that all of a sudden feel that people are either abusing a system or forcing a landlord to do something with their own property that they are just choosing not to. So I do know a lot of people are just really happy that there is different guidance on that, but I want to be very clear that this is also not just a free-for-all. This is not where we can just start declining people or kicking people that are already our current tenants out. I still find that there is a lot of vagueness around it, and I'm going to kind of walk through kind of when we talk about what happened here about why it's a change, but I feel like this is not completely set in stone here. But we do need to continue to follow this story and this information as we move forward. I think we're looking on quite a few more changes as we move forward. So let's kind of hop into this. So first thing that we want to talk about here is the information that came out and the stories that are being reported on is really about HUD. Okay, if you are not familiar with HUD, HUD is the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Okay, they oversee housing policy on a federal level. They talk about the fair housing guidelines. That really is where that enforcement comes from. If you've seen when we talk about in-lady landlords, if you've seen when we talk about, oh, you can have somebody file a fair housing complaint if you discriminate or if you have issues with ESAs, anything in that space, it is HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Department, that looks into those complaints, that goes through those. Many of you might remember, if you've been in the group for a while, I actually had to contact HUD as I felt I was being discriminated against with a house purchase that I was looking to make in March of 2025. So I did contact them. I have followed up about this situation too, so happy to share some of the details that I was able to get from that. But HUD is who oversees that and really puts out that guidance for tenants and landlords, okay? So why this is important to us. This guidance is really what we are to follow when it comes to tenant screening, accommodations, policies, compliance, the categories that we cannot discriminate. We're not getting into that today. We actually have a training coming up in Lady Landlords on June 30th that's going to be all about tenant screening and how to go through best practices. So if you are not registered for that training on June 30th, write the word tenant down in the comments here, and I will make sure to get you over that registration link, okay? But we're really just talking about ESAs here. So let's talk about what changed, what actually has occurred over these past few days. So just a few days ago, HUD has issued an internal memo to their staff within the department, and they have repealed certain guidance that is related to ESAs, okay? What they instructed in that memo, what they have repealed, is that they are now informing their staff that they should not be pursuing complaints about ESAs where the animal was not trained to provide a disability-related task, okay? This does not mean that fair housing is repealed. This does not mean that ESAs now don't have any protections. This does not mean we can start declining people, okay? I want to say this sentence again, and that's why I keep looking to my side, because I wanted to make sure to get you guys really correct information. So I'm going to read that sentence back over again. HUD has now instructed their staff to stop pursuing any complaints involving ESAs that are not trained to perform disability-related tasks, okay? This is not a repeal of the law, not a repeal of a rewrite, but this is really an enforcement shift. Almost the idea of like, now something, it might still be legal, but now it's kind of like decriminalized, right? Where people aren't getting arrested for it. I feel like this was something that like we've seen in other arenas recently, but now this is what we're really seeing within the ESA practice, okay? So under previous guidance, what that meant was that if you did deny an ESA, right? If you did say no, even though I have a no pet policy, so I'm not accepting an animal, I am still charging fees. If you denied that, that could have actually triggered federal enforcement, not only with what goes on within your own local area or state, but really at a federal level, you could have actually run into a lot of different issues for that. But now, HUD is going to be less likely to pursue those complaints for ESAs that are untrained, okay? So in that statement that I read to you guys twice, to me there's really three important pieces here. One, they're not going to pursue those complaints, right? So once again, that piece there means that it's still, with them not pursuing that, it still means that basically it's wrong, but they're not going to enforce it, okay? So that's really piece number one, okay? So you still have to recognize that that is something that just at this period of time, guidance might on that change, but it is something that will not necessarily be enforced. The second piece of that statement that's incredibly important is the idea of being trained. Previously, there was no training program. There was no guidance on federal training program or certificate program. There was no information on what needed to be done in order to qualify an animal for an ESA, right? We've all seen the little online certificates. We've all seen the little vests that they put on the dogs that you see running around the grocery store. Now there's going to be more information about what's needed for those animals to be actually trained. And then the third piece of that sentence that's incredibly important is disability-related task. Okay, so those are three pieces of what we're really going to address here, okay? So we already talked about now, once again, it's really something that it still might be wrong and the law is not being changed, but right now the enforcement is the piece that's going to change, right? HUD is saying we're not enforcing that. That's piece number one from that sentence. Number two, now we're kind of moving a little bit more to the American Disabilities Act and service animals. Remember, there is a difference between service animals and ESAs. Now all of a sudden HUD is really kind of starting to kind of change the definition of an ESA and align it a little bit more closely to the American Disabilities Act, okay, to a service animal. What that means, though, is that it's kind of removing and taking some animals out of that category, but making it stronger for those that actually will still be included in what will be enforced, okay? With that, now we're talking more about what is the training of that animal and what is that task-based support, okay? Really also another piece that came out in the articles with HUD talked about how, for example, a task that's related to the disability would be if a dog is able to support with panic attacks, right? If that's something that that is now a task that animal can perform and can do. And what they're really removing is the comfort, is the companionship, those types of kind of more generalized emotional support. Those are the ones that they're really saying are not really going to be enforced and that there's not really a training kind of involved in that, okay? Remember, when we are qualifying service animals and emotional support animals, the diagnosis is not the important part. We actually do not need to know that. We cannot know that. That is not a question a landlord can ask. You could not ask an applicant, hey, what is your disability? That's a big no-no, okay? That's where things become problematic. What you can ask, though, is what is the task that the animal is trained to perform? And that's really where we'll need to be doing our due diligence on what the training is and what the task is. If it's, oh, well, my emotional support snake is just here to provide companionship, unfortunately, that is the type of situation that HUD is really just not paying attention to and is going to just really not deal with those types of complaints. But the more of a task that is going to be performed that an animal can be trained, once again, panic attacks, making sure people take their medicine for anxiety, whatever it may be in those types of situations, that still is going to be enforced. So we have to start learning what the difference is between those spaces. I just want to make that clear. We cannot ask what the disability is. And honestly, it should not matter to us as landlords. If we have valid notes from doctors and legit doctors and we have that skill-based, I know I personally as a landlord am absolutely happy to make an accommodation when it is needed, okay? So that's really where that separation is. So personally for me, it does not matter what a person's diagnosis is. What's important to me is really making sure that it really is not an abuse of the system and this really is a person that is in need of that support. Happy to make that accommodation, not so happy the other way, okay? And I know I'm not the only landlord that feels that way. We talk about that very often in the Lady Landlords group. Third piece of that now is because of that change, there is also going to be some change in how fees are going to take place. Up until now, we have not been able to charge deposits, fees, monthly pet rent, anything of those nature for animals that were covered under ESAs, right? So if someone came in and said, hey, this animal provides me comfort, here's a doctor letter that I bought offline for $30, now all of a sudden we couldn't charge. We couldn't have that security deposit. The animals had no training. We had to let them in even if it was a no pets building, and we weren't able to charge for that. We were always able to charge for the damage, and I feel like that's something that most landlords don't always remember. But even though you can't take the deposit up front, even a service dog, if they still cause damage to the property, you can still charge for any damage that is done, but you cannot collect up front and you cannot charge any fees for that. And that's really what started that online certificate mill, if you will, of people going and claiming that their animals were ESAs, right? And I think that's where many landlords got frustrated, was just kind of the abuse of the system, okay? But now it seems, and once again, my interpretation, that HUD is a little bit more okay now with landlords charging those fees for the untrained ESAs, okay, that do not perform necessarily a task, and then also for the ESAs that really are just providing comfort and companionship, that do not perform a specific task, okay? So those are kind of your three large changes from that. All right. So feel free, once again, drop any questions down in the chat. I will come back and answer them in a second. Like I said, I'm normally when I do lives, when I do my trainings, I do not stay as closely to my notes, but I do want to make sure, since we are talking about something with legal ramifications, and once again, my interpretation as a non-attorney, but as a landlord, I want to make sure that I am giving you guys correct information here. Okay. Now, on top of now this guidance that we've seen come in from HUD, we still have to remember state laws, city laws, anything that's dealing with our municipality, that still might mean that these changes with HUD don't actually make a difference, okay? If you have, I'm in New York, we have very strict laws here that we have to be able to follow, and sometimes, especially in New York City, it does not matter what's on a federal level, what our local level is talking about, we have to file the guidance there, okay? So this is going to be incredibly important for your own location to make sure that you still understand what is going on there, especially if you are in more tenant-friendly areas. Definitely something you want to make sure that you understand what's happening in your space. Fair housing protections are still going to be important. That still is not changing, right? And it still is a law. All because it's a change of enforcement doesn't mean the law itself is actually changing at this period in time, okay? Because of that, tenants can still actually sue landlords privately, meaning instead of going to HUD and filing a complaint for discrimination or fair housing guidelines, tenants can still sue. You could still end up in court for that. Remember, people can really kind of sue for any reason that they want. I think HUD was still, and fair housing laws, I feel like there's still kind of some vagueness inside of what is allowed, what is not allowed. And because of that vagueness, I do think that there's going to be more lawsuits from this. I do think there's probably going to be updated guidance on this because I feel like there's not a full set of clarity on this. And because of that, do remember we still can be sued. And I think this guidance is actually going to be challenged. I think we are going to see lawsuits within this. I do think HUD is also going to have to provide maybe and hopefully a little bit more clear information due to policy of just not enforcing things. I find that really odd. I personally, just as a layperson, I find it very odd that we would have a law that we're not enforcing. That's just me. So hopefully this will lead to some more changes. But once again, it is very vague now. There are things that we still have to, once again, talk to our own local attorneys and make the best decisions for our own portfolios right now, just because there's just not clear guidance on that. And I think there still leaves a lot of loopholes and gaps in information that are going to be very interesting for landlords and tenants alike. Part of that is what happens with all of these existing tenants that moved in, and I know there's people in Lady Landlords. Put a 1 down in the comment in the chat box here, if you feel that you have tenants that have come to you with ESAs that you feel like are abusing the system, that came to you with a letter that you really kind of questioned where they got that online certificate from, or if you feel that they are just falling under that comfort companionship kind of space. Put a 1 down in the chat if you feel that you already have an existing tenant that probably would not qualify now based on updated guidance. I'm just curious to see where people kind of fall with what you currently have. It was interesting. We talked about this topic yesterday in the chat, and we had 400 comments. I think I'm still going through some of them, trying to get back to everybody. So bear with me if I have not. We've had a lot of conversations about this over the past day. But a lot of people kind of said, pretty much any dog they feel like is there for emotional support and the idea of companionship or comfort or anything like that. And I kind of agree with you. I mean, as I'm a dog lover myself, and I think that they just put a smile on anybody. Maybe not anybody. I got to say my husband, probably not a dog lover, maybe not so much on his, but I feel like for most of us, we do feel that comfort, but that does not necessarily mean that they should be a medical device in the sense of an ESA. So what now do we do if we have people that already are seeing those accommodations within their own properties? Well, unfortunately, right now, we're not seeing anything really changing with that. And I do think there's going to be probably some updated guidance on what's going to happen with those people. Are they grandfathered in, or is that something at least renewal that a landlord can say, hey, HUD guidelines changed, we can now charge, now you have a security deposit, now you can have pet fees, or, hey, I'm now not renewing you because this is a pet-free building and I want to see you out. So for all of you that put a 1 down in the chat to let me know that you were in a situation where you already had an animal with an ESA that you feel like does not follow this guidance, I want to hear your plan. let me know, and once again, this is just a conversation between us here, but what would you as a landlord like to do? Okay, not necessarily what do you feel like you can legally do. What would you like to do? If you put a 1 down in the chat box, let me know. Do you plan on not renewing? Do you plan on charging now at lease renewal? Do you plan on having now asking for a monthly pet fee? I'm very curious on what you guys are going to do in this situation. So share a little bit if you are in that space of already having a tenant that has been previously approved, because right now that information is not being revoked. So we will stay on top of this, and I will continue to follow up and see what I can find out from HUD on if we start seeing that. But as of right now, there has not been a change to that. What we want to do right now is, honestly, there's not much that we can kind of change with what's already existing, right? We cannot go back, right? There's no reason we're not going and running over to our rental properties and just saying, hey, get out, that's it, no more dogs in this property, no more ESAs. We can't do that right now. So no reason to make dramatic changes within what our portfolio is from that perspective, okay? But absolutely something that we need to continue to do our due diligence when we have tenants that are coming to our process. We always need to be able to document our process when we have our tenant screening. That is incredibly important. If you have ever been in court, and I've been to small claims 5-6 times now since becoming a landlord, 0 I think before that, but since becoming a landlord, I've been to court a bunch of times, and you need to have your evidence and your documentation. I have been involved, once again, in fair housing issues. As I mentioned, that I was actually the one that filed a complaint last year with HUD. But we need to make sure that we are getting requests for these accommodations in writing, okay? Once again, we are not asking for a diagnosis. We do not need a diagnosis, okay? I don't want to know a diagnosis. Not my business as a landlord to know about your health. But we need to make sure that we are getting an understanding of what is the task that the animal is able to perform in order to support that tenant. And we also need to understand what that training is. Those 2 pieces are going to be the key, once again, to if we can deny or if we can charge fees for those tenants. We also need to still make sure that we are getting those doctor's notes and verifying those letters. I am hoping that this guidance opens a door for a little more regulation from, and I think somebody in the group, I'm sorry I cannot remember your name, but somebody had mentioned kind of like these online certification mills, right? Where you just kind of go online, you pay a small fee, you don't even meet with a doctor, they're not even in the same state as you, and then now all of a sudden we have people that are coming in and giving these letters for people that we've never seen. So I do hope that will be a change there, but we still need to verify. I have gotten ESA letters that have had doctored information. The doctor listed out their medical license on it. And I worked in the medical field for about 15 years, and I looked at that number, especially in the state of New York, and I was like, there is something definitely wrong with that. So went, looked it up, was able to find through the registry and realized it was a complete fake number, wasn't even a doctor, and that was actually from an online site. So we do need to make sure that we have that documentation and we are checking those things. I was able to deny that tenant based on the falsifying of information, right? I did a whole story about that on the Lady Landlords podcast about what happened with that dramatic set of tenants at move-in. So feel free to go over the Lady Landlords podcast and take a listen to that episode if you want to learn more about what happened there and what you could do when tenants lie. We're also going to be talking about that on the upcoming tenant training. So once again, June 30th, if you would like to join, make sure to write the word tenant down in the chat and I will get you that information. But we're going to continue to see some more guidance on this. I do think we're going to see some changes. I do think there's going to be some lawsuits that are going to be challenging this. So as landlords, it is very important for us to stay involved in legislation. I think it's important to make sure that we are involved in the community where we do own rentals. You can even do those things online, but we need to be really informed about what's going on. It is our business. It is our livelihood for a lot of us, and this is something that if you have an investment, we need to be able to protect that. And I think it's very important to make sure that we are staying up to date on our laws and also staying in touch with our local attorneys. With tenant management, this is just a very small piece of it, right? So we want to make sure that we're staying involved. We want to make sure that we're documenting process. On that training on June 30th, that is something that we will be going through. We're going to be going through filling vacancies, screening tenants properly, fair housing laws, not just about ESAs and service animals, but we're going to be talking about all of the different protected classes and what we can ask, what we cannot ask, what we should accept, what we can deny, all of those different pieces that are kind of nuanced there. and how to really make sure that we are not putting ourselves out for a lawsuit, avoiding costly mistakes, and scaling systems. So if that is something that you would like to do, or at least if you're either starting out as a landlord, and that is one of those big scary pieces when we hand over keys to a tenant, or if you already are a current tenant and you just want to tighten up your systems and get a little feedback about what other landlords are doing to protect their portfolios, I definitely encourage you to join that class coming up on June 30th. Once again, just put tenant down in the comments and I'll send you over the registration details for that, okay? I think those are all the pieces I wanted to share with you. So I want to know down in the comments, let me then know, how does this impact you particularly, okay? I already have the people I want to see who already has these tenants and what you plan on doing, especially at renewal with your current tenants that have ESAs, but I'm curious down in the chat. Let me know here. Do you allow pets? Do you not? One of the topics that came up yesterday when we were talking about ESAs in the Lady Landlords Facebook group is I had some women really concerned that this was going to impact a lot of animals and having to be deserted, abandoned, and ending up in shelters because of the fact that landlords are able to deny these animals. To me, I think that was an interesting thought. I actually see that possibly more landlords would be open to accepting animals if we can actually charge for it. It is, I think if you've been a landlord for any period of time, you know how hard it is to collect money after the fact. Right? We already sometimes have problems collecting rent. But if you are in a position where now there's damage to your house, not even about animals, but about, I don't know, a kid flushing something down a toilet, now calling, having to get a plumber to come out for something. That is difficult enough to get a tenant to pay for anything that they actually broke. Right? But if we are in a position where now I can say, hey, you have an animal, you need a deposit to put down that I can use in case there is damage, I feel like this actually might allow more landlords to actually accept animals because there is an ability to have those funds up front, to charge that pet rent, to say, hey, if I'm letting in the pet, this is now that conversation we need to have. I personally welcome conversation with tenants. I want them to be upfront and clear. I want to be upfront and clear. I want to make sure that we have an agreement. I want to make sure that we all know what's going on and that we can be protected and the tenant can be happy. Okay, I've always seen my role as a landlord as somebody that provides clean, stable housing for a fellow human to be able to live there. And because of that, I think this will hopefully, and my wish is that this will open up a conversation that will actually keep more animals housed and also create better relationships between landlords and tenants. But I'm curious, you might not feel that way. I would love to hear what your thoughts are. So please drop down in the chat how you feel that this will impact your rental properties personally, but also what you feel like this is going to do for our industry, okay? Once again, we are watching this topic. I do feel there's going to be more information coming out with HUD, so I will make sure to keep our community, as always, informed. If you are over on the Lady Landlords Facebook community watching me there, do know that sometimes I do post videos over on my Instagram at the Becky Nova. And if you're over here on Instagram and you're not in the Lady Landlords Facebook community, go hop in there so you do not miss our future upcoming trainings. All right. Also, while we're here, I'll just give quick shout out. We do have our New York investor meetup coming up on Thursday, June 4th. If you are in the New York area and would like to join, feel free to put an NY down in the chat, and I'll make sure to send you over details for that event. And lastly, if you'd like to discuss how this change in ESAs or your tenant screening process and fair housing guidelines are impacted because of this, feel free just to grab a call time with me. You can see that down in the comments. I do have a link there. Grab a time. Let's chat about what's going on in your portfolio. Happy to talk what's going through your situation and make sure you get the support that you need. My door is always open. You guys mostly have my phone number, so don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything that I could do to help and support. All right? I'm going to come back and answer questions. Let's see what I got. Hopefully I don't lose you guys in that. But let me grab this and see what questions came through. Hey, Rebecca, how you doing? So once again, you are in New York like me, so yes. With that, we do have to make sure that we are following any state guidance, okay? And that, remember too, depending on where you are in New York, I don't think you're in New York City, but that does also make a difference where in the state of New York you are. So great question there, but yes, anybody needs to make sure that they are following up on what their state actually provides there. So do make sure to take that into consideration. Your rents are cheap, so you would rather charge a separate pet deposit than rent. Right. So Rebecca, that is an important point. So in New York State, for anybody else in New York, you cannot charge a deposit that's more than what that rent would be. So Rebecca, what you actually can do is if you are charging that pet rent, let's say your rent is $2,000 a month, okay? And now you're going to charge an extra $50 a month for that pet rent. You can then charge your security deposit would then be $2,050 because of the increase with pet rent, okay? So no, you cannot charge in the state of New York. We can't then charge an extra $1,000 for that pet. But if we increase and add on that pet rent, you then can increase the overall security deposit, okay? Not a huge change there if you're doing it with that monthly view, but once again, something there. And Rebecca, you're in Orange County, so I'm now in Dutchess. You should totally come over the bridge next week for our New York event. It's going to be in Poughkeepsie, so just something to kind of think about there. Would love to meet you in person. You've been in the Facebook group forever, I feel like. Hope this kind of clarified some things. At least I'm trying to get out the most correct information that we have and the most updated guidance that we have from HUD at this point in time. I will continue to update you guys, but hopefully this kind of shuts down some of the rumors that have been going around, and hopefully this helps some of you ladies. So if this did help, if you find that this was useful, do know I do trainings every single Wednesday here in the Facebook group, but give me a 2. Give me a 2 if this was something that was helpful and you would like me to do more of these, and I will continue to update you guys with local law. All right? Have a great day, and I will see you guys all soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Lady Landlords podcast. If you're feeling stuck in your real estate investing journey, visit lady-landlord.com to book a 15-minute orientation call with me and see if you're ready to join our mentorship program. Or you can subscribe to our newsletter and join our Facebook group for exclusive real estate investing tips and offers. Invest with confidence. Become a Lady Landlord today.